So with Captain America 4 coming up in a few weeks, thought we'd take a look back in time 20 plus years ago to the year 2003 with the Ang Lee Hulk. Yeah. Okay, all jokes aside, with Harrison Ford being the Red Hulk in Brave New World, I think this is a good excuse for me to look back on a feature film involving the Hulk that doesn't involve the MCU. The Ang Lee Hulk is a very interesting one. Up until a couple of nights ago, I haven't watched this movie in 20 years, and it's not exactly highly regarded. Although the consensus that I was able to get after rewatching this, I watched a few reviews. From what I see, it's a very mixed response. When this came out, it was pretty big. At least for me, it was pretty big. To see a comic book character that can turn into a big, green, raging monster when he gets angry. That to me, at 13 years old when this came out, was a huge thing for me. Because we had Spider-Man in the previous year, now the comic book genre was really taking off. I mean, besides the comic book nerds who knew about Bruce Banner becoming the Hulk, general audiences or the general public knew who he was because of Lou Ferrigno, who along with Stan Lee makes a brief cameo appearance in this film as a security guard. As a kid, I really liked this movie. I mean, I was mostly watching it for the Hulk out scenes. Then I forgot about it over time with the arrival of the Dark Knight trilogy and Iron Man and how the MCU exploded into where it is right now. And I heard about the consensus by talking with other YouTubers in the YouTube sphere. So I wanted to rewatch this film with an objective look and see how does it hold up after all this time. To put it lightly, it was interesting. I think it has the right intentions behind it, and I like the idea that the movie does present an idea about human nature and what we're repressing, what's inside of us that we're afraid of. To my knowledge, the Incredible Hulk character is a very tormented soul, because he doesn't want to be this monster, and yet he enjoys that feeling of power, which unfortunately, whenever he gets angry, it's out of his control. I mean, this is basically Marvel's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Stan Lee, when he was alive, publicly said that he was a big fan of that story, and he used it as an inspiration for the Hulk and various villains for Spider-Man, including the Green Goblin. At the time when this film was released, you had a pretty solid set of people that were making this. From the cast, you had Eric Bana, Jennifer Connelly, Nick Nolte, Sam Elliott, and Josh Lucas. And behind the camera, you had acclaimed director Ang Lee, who's known for films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Brokeback Mountain, Ice Storm, and The Life of Pi, which for that film, he won Best Director at the Oscars. This is basically the origin story of how Bruce Banner becomes the Hulk. We see him growing up in this area in the western United States, the son of David Banner, who's a scientist working on desert base, trying to come up with strengthening the human immune systems with gamma radiation. His superior, Colonel Ross, rejects the idea, so he secretly experiments on himself. Then he and his wife have a child who they name Bruce Banner, and he discovers that that radiation he injected himself with has passed on to his son. His efforts to hide his experiments get discovered by Colonel Ross, who kicks him off the project, and then he causes some explosion to happen at Desert Base, and then he and his wife get into an argument when he gets home, but then it cuts to many years later when Bruce is going off to college. Then we're introduced to Bruce Banner as an adult, played by Eric Bana, who's working as a scientist at the Berkeley University Science Institute, or something to do with Berkeley Science, I'm not sure exactly. Working with his ex-girlfriend Betty Ross, played by Jennifer Connelly, they're experimenting with gamma radiation and how they can use it to heal physical damage in living creatures, mostly with frogs at this point, hoping to maybe eventually carry it over to human beings. The same type of work that his father David was working on. And at this point we're told that Bruce Banner is actually Bruce Krenzler, or his adoptive name is Bruce Krenzler. He was told by his adoptive family and other people that his real parents are dead. Throughout the film we see as the audience that Bruce is very repressed. He doesn't remember what happened to him that day when his dad came home. And once he gets exposed by the gamma radiation, when his one colleague almost gets fried by it, it awakens that Hulk part inside of him that was passed on by his birth father. And whenever he gets angry, those memories that he's repressing start to manifest by turning him into the Hulk. On paper, I would say that's a really interesting idea to explore, and they do address a little bit of that when he says that he does like it when he loses control. Unfortunately, I think that emotional heft is missing, because throughout most of the movie, Bruce doesn't really talk to anybody. He's very aloof and just kind of plays off everything. I'm not trying to put any of the blame on Eric Bana. Maybe it's some of his fault, maybe it's the writing or the direction or all three of those things combined. And I don't want to compare him to Mark Ruffalo or Edward Norton even, because I understand the intention that they were going for. I think Eric Bana plays the part fine, but I don't like that character. Throughout most of the movie, he's very one note. That's really the big problem with this movie, besides other stuff. One of the biggest problems, I should say. There's really not as much levity throughout the film. It's a pretty big downer, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, I've heard some people say that about The Dark Knight Rises, that it was just literally showered in depressing scenes. I beg to differ on that one. This one is the real downer. I wouldn't say for me that it was dull to watch. It didn't really have as much energy as I wanted to see. When he hulks out, obviously it does get exciting, but as far as the character stuff, I don't really feel that same type of oomph. I get it, he's a tortured soul, but I know plenty of people who have been through traumatic experiences. And even at their lowest moments, they manage to find a way to find some sense of hope that puts a smile on their face. And Eric Bana, I think, is a very capable actor. He was really good as Hector in Troy. I know he was in Munich, but I don't really remember much about what happens in that one. Same thing for Black Hawk Down, if he is in that one. Is he actually in Black Hawk Down? Yes, he is in Black Hawk Down. Okay. If he was given the right material, I think he could have had a good run with it. But I find the character personally to be very vapid and uninteresting. Same thing goes for Jennifer Connelly as Betty Ross. She's very serious, like Bruce Banner is throughout the whole thing. I do kind of like how she's afraid of Bruce and how she has these nightmares of something that happened to her when she was a child. And then in the dream, adult Bruce comes in to pick her up and then he does something to hurt her. With him being so repressed, obviously that would lead to some emotional distance between the two of them in a relationship. But again, we don't really get a good enough idea as to what exactly led to that breakup. I mean, I get it, you don't want to have a huge info dump or anything, but when you boil down to it, context can speak wonders. Then there's Sam Elliott as General Ross, Betty's father. He's probably the one character that I would say is the most fun to watch. It's kind of like the Ewan McGregor syndrome, at least in my experience anyway. I don't know how everybody else feels. I can watch Sam Elliott in this movie and go, okay, that's fine. Sam Elliott served in the Air Force a long time ago, and he has the look of a military veteran. You just put a uniform on him, you would never think otherwise.
If you ever come within 1,000 yards of my daughter again, I'll put you away for the rest of your natural life.
Nick Nolte is also around, as David Banner, Bruce's father. Now that he's been released from prison, he's keeping an eye on his son Bruce throughout the lab. He gets a job as a night janitor and is secretly taking Bruce's DNA so he can use it for himself or for any other living species that lives with him, like his dogs, who later become giant poodles. Besides Sam Elliott, I would say Nick Nolte is definitely the best actor in this one. We actually do see a backstory with him. I mean, we do get the backstory with Bruce Banner, but to see some sort of regret that David feels when it's revealed that he accidentally killed Bruce's mom, I have to admit, on an emotional level, when that's revealed, as he's telling Betty the story, seeing Bruce's response or a lack of a response, just horrified and unable to comprehend what he's seeing, and his mother willing to sacrifice herself to protect her child, I have to admit that did kind of hit me. And then I do like how in the following scene we see that Bruce finally remembers what happened, so that anger that he feels towards his father is justified because it starts to manifest with him turning into the Hulk, which is a realistic way to look at it, because whenever somebody experiences a traumatic event, if you don't find a way to properly cope with it through therapy or some kind of a support group, it's going to manifest itself in ways that are not healthy for you or for anybody else in your life. Now, I've never experienced abuse like that, nor have I seen somebody like a family member killing another right in front of me like Bruce does, but I've had some issues of my own that I repressed for so long that it got to a point some time ago where I had to go visit a therapist to get some help with it. And I can tell you for a fact, therapy is very beneficial. But then there's Josh Lucas, who plays Glenn Talbot. This character is just so one-dimensional and stupid, and probably nothing else I can really add to that. I mean, I've liked Josh Lucas and other stuff that I've seen him in. I don't dislike him in this movie, it's just that character I don't like. But there's a couple of moments involving him that really left me stunned. Like when he goes to confront Bruce at his house, the Hulk throws him onto the porch, then shoves him with his foot onto the street, and then kicks him into another bodyguard that's watching him outside the house. I mean, there's no way you'd be able to survive a couple hits from a giant monster. And then when he goes to visit him in the desert base where Bruce is being kept, he zaps him with an electric cattle prod or something, trying to turn him into the Hulk so he could take a piece of him and use it to experiment. Dude, are you really that stupid? This guy almost killed you. But I have to admit, when Bruce does turn into the Hulk after that nightmare, Talbot tries to get the sample of him in the hallway, and then he uses a grenade launcher to try to kill him. Yeah, that always made me laugh. And that's another thing. The transition from that scene to the next with the comic book panel style that Ang Lee goes for here, that is extremely distracting. Sometimes it's actually not that bad, like this moment right here.
Sir, negative on drill penetration.
Damn it, drill him harder. Give me full RPMs. Come on, Hallman, come on.
But a lot of times, it's almost a constant transition from one panel to the next. I get the idea that Ang Lee was going for a comic book brought to life type of feel. Maybe for a couple scenes you could try to emulate that. But after a while, it's just way too much. Biggest overuses of that for me, I can't find the clips to illustrate this for you, you'd have to watch the movie for yourself, is when Glenn Talbot is introduced and he runs into Betty Ross at the lab. When she turns around and he comes up to her, as that style was going on in that moment, I went, Oh God, no, stop it! And then when David Banner gets taken to see his son, he's sitting in his cell, and then he looks up as the door opens. We see the soldier from the other side of the door coming to take him away. The expression that he has is still in the top panel of the screen. It lingers on that for about 10 seconds. I'll be fair, this is really in the nitpicky territory, but I've always found that extremely distracting. I guess now that we're talking about Nick Nolte, him as David Banner, he's a very power-hungry person who wants to have this power of invincibility with gamma radiation. So now that his son has turned into this raging monster, he wants some of that power for himself. And he exposes himself in the lab where Bruce was infected, and he's able to meld with all the objects in his environment. Almost like in the extended cut of Terminator 2 with the T-1000. And as I mentioned that there's really not much levity, there is another moment that I did kind of find legitimately funny. Like when he sits with Bruce in the reactor when they're all watching him to make sure he doesn't turn into the Hulk again. That's really the only time during this movie I legitimately laughed besides Talbot's death scene. The only things I've seen Nick Nolte in outside of the Hulk are the movie Warrior with Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton, and Hotel Rwanda with Don Cheadle. I always found Nick Nolte to be very strange. Him and Woody Harrelson and Christopher Walken, I think, are right in that category. He's probably, besides Sam Elliott, the most energetic actor in this whole thing. I guess that does count for something. But I don't really get a good sense of a character arc from anybody in here. I mean, if some people could point it out to me if you do like the movie, I'm willing to hear you guys out. This whole thing really just lacks in the character development as far as I'm concerned. However, when the Hulk out stuff does happen, some of it I like and some of it I don't really like. The dogfight. I guess we'll just get that out of the way. The poodles are just really... yeah. The fact that he punches them in the nutsack... I didn't even remember that from when I was 13. I went, what the... And they just vaporize into green dust. They're gamma radiated, so makes sense. It did give me flashbacks to the Hulk video game, which you do fight some dogs like that in the sewers. The first Hulk out scene where Bruce turns into the Hulk just out of pure rage, I mean, it does kind of come out of left field, which... that's kind of the whole point of a Hulk transformation anyway when he does it for the first time. But what I do like about that moment is that it's mostly in the dark and you can't really see the Hulk too good. It's very chaotic and scary. Bruce is not really sure what's happening, so obviously trying to put us in the headspace of Bruce Banner in that moment, I think in a way was a really smart decision because we as the audience are meant to go, what the hell is happening right now? I love him smashing the tanks around or swinging around in a circle, throwing that one tank about 5 miles away from him. But my favorite action scenes are between the Hulk and the helicopters in the desert. This moment in particular is my favorite part of the whole thing.
Tango flight, clear back. Got a clear for hellfire.
And I just realized the score in that scene is really exciting too, and it's done by Danny Elfman. But with the opening credits, I thought, this is Danny Elfman, isn't it? And as soon as I saw his name, I went, I knew it! It sounds very much like his score for Spider-Man, which came out in the previous year. I think Danny Elfman, if anything, should be a required go-to person for a musical score for a comic book movie. And I've always thought this moment was really cool too, when the Hulk is running through the desert and he finally has enough strength to jump over a long distance. And I just remembered about the Hulk's design. It's alright, I guess. I don't mind him being a little bit bigger than he normally would in the comics or even with Edward Norton's or Mark Ruffalo's portrayals of the Hulk. I mean, he starts off kind of in that normal size that Mark Ruffalo's Hulk would be, but then when Talbot confronts him, he grows like 3 times that size, almost like the size of King Kong, which I guess they couldn't help themselves with by nodding to that when he picks up Betty Ross at her cabin in the woods. I did hear someone say a long time ago that this Hulk kind of looks like Play-Doh. Now I cannot see that anymore. But as opposed to the MCU Hulk, which does look like Mark Ruffalo, and even the Red Hulk in the Captain America 4 trailers looks a lot like Harrison Ford, this one I don't really think looks like Eric Bana. Maybe a little bit, but it looks like it could have been any other actor that played him. And I want to try to make this clear. I am not saying that you shouldn't take the Hulk story seriously, because Bruce is a very tortured soul and you want to address that part of him, but after a while, if you lean too heavy into that, it does get really tiresome, which unfortunately is the opposite problem that the MCU has, where a lot of people say that that's too much of a lighthearted lens to look at the Hulk through. How many times can we really do that? Can he still go through some compelling stuff? Obviously, yeah, I'm not against that. Who doesn't want to hear somebody like Captain America say, Hulk, smash. So I do like the idea of Hulk being a tortured soul, and I think this movie is probably the best that we'll ever get in that category. Personally, I'm more than willing to put that behind us. Because where the Hulk is right now with Mark Ruffalo, I know other people roll their eyes at the comedic side of the whole thing. I'm down for whatever they're going to do with him, as long as they can make it work in the story. And the finale between him and his father when he turns into the Absorbing Man fully, that finale was just so weird. I mean, I like the idea of father and son facing off against each other, but there's a few unintentionally funny moments that kind of ruin it for me.
You think you can live with it? Take it! Take it on!
It's scary, but also kind of funny at the same time. So the military fires their missiles at the lake, and they are presumably killed. I mean, I guess David Banner is dead, but then it cuts to a year later, and Betty Ross is being watched by the military and the government, and during a talk with her father over the phone, they get some unconfirmed sightings of the Hulk throughout the world. And then it ends with him in South America or Latin America providing for these local families with medicine, and these soldiers come to take it away, causing Bruce to go into Hulk mode. There's only one problem I have with that. We don't get to see the bearded Hulk. So Hulk 2003, or the Ang Lee Hulk, it's an admirable attempt with some good intentions behind it, but it doesn't really stick the landing for me. It's very hollow characters and a very hollow plot too, where we don't really get the emotional oomph that audiences would be craving for a story like this. Bruce Banner is a very tortured soul, and I think that they do, in a way, kind of tap into that, but they barely scratch the surface on that one. Some fun action and some interesting stylistic choices that unfortunately really weigh the movie down. And I've heard some people say they prefer something like this over the MCU, whereas this one's a lot more experimental. I totally understand where that comes from, but that doesn't equate to quality entertainment. If people like this movie, and I've seen some defenders for it online, it's perfectly fine with me. Just for myself, and you could call me an MCU fanboy all you want, I honestly would prefer what they do with Mark Ruffalo. I can respect what this film does on a conceptual level, but for me at the end of the day, it just doesn't work. So that's all I gotta say about the Ang Lee Hulk. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for my review of the Incredible Hulk coming up pretty soon. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie if you've seen it. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.